Are you struggling with roadblocks as a woman in the challenging and constantly changing world of corporate America? If you feel stuck in your career, you may be holding yourself back and may not even realize it. Prepare to be enlightened by the meaningful discussions here at the No Woman Left Behind podcast. Each week, gather the insight you need to break down those walls of limiting beliefs. Unleash your full potential and unlock the leader within. Listen to raw conversations with corporate women as they share inspiring stories with the purpose of obtaining their dream career and living a truly fulfilling life. Here's your host, Rosie Zilinskas.
Welcome back once again to the No Woman Left Behind podcast show. I'm Rosie Zilinskas, your podcast host. Today, we are in the home stretch of the How to Negotiate in the Corporate World series. This is episode 7 of 8, and we are going to be talking to Patricia Carl. Now, Patty is going to be talking about a few key things. First, she mentions that negotiation is basically a bunch of withdrawals and deposits. We're also going to be talking about the fact that you need to treat your negotiation as if you were negotiating for somebody else. And then one of the other things we're going to talk about is that there are times when you don't talk first and why. So let me tell you a little bit about Patty. Patty is an HR professional. She is a leadership consultant, speaker, and the CEO of Highland Performance Solutions, a woman-owned organizational consulting firm that works with leaders, teams, and organizations to unlock potential and drive organizations' performance. Patty and her firm help leaders create thriving, dynamic, engaging cultures where people feel valued and motivated to do their best work. Her thought leadership has been featured in publications such as Forbes, Harvard Business Review, ATD, Entrepreneur Magazine, and more. And she's also in the process of writing a personalized leadership book. So with that, stay tuned for Patricia Carl. Hey, Patty, thank you so much for being here on the No Woman Left Behind podcast show. I appreciate your time. I know you and I spoke previously, and you had mentioned something to me that whenever you're negotiating, you need to almost come to the negotiating table as if you were negotiating for somebody else. Can you elaborate a little bit more on why you think women should come to the negotiating from that respect?
Yeah, I think for a few reasons, and some of them are big macro reasons. Women, I think, have been socialized to be less assertive, and so much less likely to sort of be self-promoting or to be self-aggrandizing, and so that can sometimes get in the way of negotiation. And so one of the things that research has found is that if women actually are negotiating or advocating on behalf of someone else, they do a better job. And so I think coming into that situation with an idea of, hey, I might be creating a situation where the women behind me are going to be able to negotiate a lot more easily. Or if I'm coming into a negotiation, I'm talking about the work of my team instead of just my own work, using sort of we statements and not I. And that makes me more comfortable, then that's how a woman should approach the negotiation. I think whatever sort of puts her into her power when she's walking into that situation is going to serve her well throughout that conversation.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Now, you said something key there in your answer. You said we versus I. Now, obviously, if I am trying to get whether it's a salary increase or a promotion, I'm not going to say the word we. So when would you say it's appropriate? And I have heard that, by the way, that it's better to use the word we. So when would you use we versus I?
I would use we when I'm talking about like my team's accomplishments. If I'm going into a salary negotiation with my boss, and I'm already working at a company, and I think I'm going to ask for more money, I would probably start with we and talk about my team's accomplishment or my function's accomplishments and what it is that we've been able to achieve. And then as I move into asking for the salary, I would switch to I and focus more on my own contributions. And the reason for that is it tends to be accepted better from women if we're using we instead of I, and not using a lot of I statements, which might seem, again, self-aggrandizing or lacking humility, or even being aggressive. And, I wish things were different, but the way that women have to negotiate, it must be different than the way that men do it if they want to be successful. Where we're countering some, pretty strong socialization forces that we're coming up against. And so just being really aware of that as you enter into those kinds of situations and discussions, and adjusting accordingly is going to get you to the answer you want.
I love that answer. And this is the first time that we're actually talking about using the word we versus I. So I think it's very critical, very crucial. And obviously you're a human resources professional. You've been, in that position for quite a long time. So you've seen a lot. One of the things that we had talked about previously is that women don't apply for jobs, having all the, skills and things like that. And you've seen where men do apply for jobs having 50% of the skills. And I know that that's part of how we are socialized. And part of the reason why we're doing this podcast and this episodes is so that we get that message out there to women. But you had said also that influence skills are critical. So let's talk a little bit about what you mean by that.
Absolutely. I think, as you rise within organizations, one of the most important things that you can do is develop your sphere of influence. And that makes negotiations when you need to negotiate a whole lot simpler, right? Because you've already paved the way for those kinds of conversations, and you've built the relationships. The way that I think about building that sphere of influence is stakeholder management, really thinking about who in my orbit is important to my success and my team's success. And that can be people who might sponsor my career. It's certainly my boss. It's other people that have a lot of interdependency with my particular function or department or team, so that I can begin to make deposits in those relationships well in advance of when I'm coming for a withdrawal. Because in organizations, we always come for the withdrawal. We're always going to be asking for something. And it's a much smoother road if you have set up that relationship ahead of time and they are more amenable to when, she's been so wonderful and made all of these deposits and helped my team. And now she's asking for something. And I am much more likely to want to help her.
Is that what you are referring to as a sponsor, someone that is there to kind of help you, not necessarily your career, but just like mentor? Like, what is the difference in your opinion between a mentor and a sponsor?
It's a great question. You actually need both.
Okay.
So, and you might need often more than one of each of those things. So mentors sometimes they're formal mentors that the organization sets up for you, and sometimes they're more informal, and they might be inside your organization, they might be outside your organization, or you might have some in each camp. And that person is the person you go to seek advice. They help you think through situations. They help get you exposure and visibility within organizations when you need it. And they can be, if they have functional expertise, they can be enormously helpful as you're developing your own leadership of a function, for example. That's a bit different than a sponsor. Sometimes a mentor can be a sponsor, but often a sponsor is not a mentor. And a sponsor is someone or some people that you have identified as having influence over your career. So somebody within the organization who has a lot of influence with others And, when they speak, people listen. And someone who thinks highly of you, or is prone to think highly of you. So maybe you need to work on that relationship to build your reputation with them over time. But they're a friendly person within the organization. And so not only do they have the power to help influence your career trajectory, but they also are vested in the relationship with you. And those are almost always informal. People don't walk around saying, that person's my sponsor. That's not how it works. But you know who they are. And those are relationships that you need to very carefully cultivate.
Got it. Now, Patty, you talked about deposits and withdrawals. So I want to focus a little bit more on that, because obviously when you're having, when you're building those relationships, you can't just take. You have to give back. So can you think of a couple of examples of how we can illustrate that to our listeners?
Yeah, I think there are a few things, and I've had some really great pieces of advice from others over the years. These are not all my own, but they're sort of my collected wisdom. So one thing is to, whenever you're thinking of someone, send them a note. So if you're reading an article, for example, that you think, wow, this would be really helpful to Joe, send the article to Joe and say, hey, I was just reading this and thinking of you. And you might not think of that as a deposit, but it is, because number one, they're flattered that you were thinking of them. And number two, the article might actually be worthwhile for them. And it keeps you sort of front and center, so that they're thinking of you more often, right? And you want to stay sort of within their consciousness. So that's one way to do it. And that can be done sort of inside organizations, and certainly within, whatever network you're trying to build. I think that can be really helpful. But also when you're inside an organization, it's being really, really intentional about meeting with your stakeholders, really understanding what business problems are they trying to solve? What are they up against? What are their barriers? And being really curious and leaning into that curiosity about what is it that they're grappling with, and how might you be able to help? And how you might be able to help could be, somebody else in the organization, another stakeholder I was just talking with, is facing the same issue or has a lot of experience in, and maybe you can connect people so that they can get the help that they need. Or maybe there's a big project and they need some folks to pitch in on a really short-term basis. Maybe that's something that you and your team can do in hopes that they'll return that favor when the time comes. So there are lots of sort of little ways to do that. And you can do things really spontaneously. So you don't have to sort of set up meetings with all of your stakeholders all the time. You could just say, hey, can I get 5 minutes if you're virtual, or if you're not virtual, you could pop in their office just to chat with them about something, or to even ask them for advice on something. Now that's dicey. You have to be careful about how often you're going to people to ask advice on things, because, when you think about when you boil it down, the two components of leadership is warmth and competence. So you want people to see you as competent, but you also want them to see you as warm. And that, I think, is especially true for women, and the bar is higher for women in terms of warmth and friendliness and helpfulness. And so just being aware of how you're showing up with other folks, and how you're helping them meet their needs will create some reciprocity.
I like that. And that all kind of goes to managing your network, like you said, inside work, which is, I like those, the stakeholders, as far as, connecting people, especially if you're just, if you're in the office and you're talking to a few people and you hear those, two things, you're like, oh, I heard that Joe needs, help, and Susie, you can help her. So I think that's a brilliant way to just, connect people and help them, and do it. Obviously, we're there, for business purposes in the corporate world, but it's also fun to be able to help people, and it's fun to be able to do it from a place of serving, and being able to build a community within your organization. Now, I know that navigating organization is key. We talked about, stakeholders, the influence. And one of the things that we had talked about is the building a business case. So whenever you're trying to, let's say, even not even something personal, if you're trying to grow your team, if you're trying to add an individual to your team, that's still part of negotiating, because you're going to have to build your case. So how would you do something like that as far as building a case?
Yeah, I think building and presenting business cases is absolutely negotiation. It's, you're sort of taking a stance on a particular initiative or a need or a set of resources. And you are in effect negotiating with, might be your CEO, it might be the leadership team, it might be your boss, whomever that is, because resources are finite, and and sort of institutional energy is finite. And so anytime that you are trying to advance a particular initiative or project, or to get additional headcount to help with those kinds of things, you are negotiating against everyone else who wants the same thing, right? And so number one, back to that stakeholder management, when you bring a business case for something, that should not be the first time they've heard of it. You should be at all times bringing people along with you in your thinking about things over time, and planting seeds with people and asking their perspective on it, right? So if you were thinking about adding, I'll just use an HR example, thinking of putting in an executive recruitment function within the HR team instead of using search firms, for example, that's a big investment. And so you would spend some period of time, usually months, talking with people about what their needs are for executive recruitment, and what challenges are they finding with search firms, and how are they grappling with that? And what would success look like for them? What would make it better? What would be an A+ experience? And then also planting seeds about, I've been thinking about this idea of an in-house executive recruitment function. I've seen it at a few other organizations and it's worked really well. I'd like to explore it for this organization. I would love your input on that, on what it would need to look like for that to be successful. And then what you've done is, number one, they're aware. They know what your plans are, right? They have some time to chew on it, but also now they're part of it because you just asked them for their perspective on it. And now they're sort of getting invested without even realizing it, that they're, proffering an opinion. They are telling you what success would look like. And so they're starting to buy into it. And so by the time that you get to presenting the big business case, there should be no surprises. My goal was always to walk into a room and no one was surprised with what I said, because I'd already had the conversations with them. And what I will say is, I was having this conversation with one of my executive coaching clients the other day. I said, I'm not telling you that this is efficient, but I'm telling you it's effective, because it does take more time and it does take more effort, but it can save you time later in terms of paving the way for the things that you want to do.
Well, and I think that's pretty brilliant in the fact that you're planting little seeds. You're seeding your idea, and to your point, you're having them opine and buy into the idea a little bit at a time. And I like what you said, that when you present something to somebody, it's not the first time that they're hearing it, because I think that's probably a lot of times, for example, if you are trying to earn a raise in your current position, not necessarily a promotion, but just earn a raise. If you blindside your boss and say, hey, why didn't I get this raise? Instead of 6 months prior to your annual review, I want to talk about my compensation. Can we discuss it? And then have a whole plan for that. I think that's pretty brilliant. Now, I know that you had mentioned last time that sometimes when you're negotiating, it's best to not talk, or don't talk first. Let's talk about that piece.
Yeah. I think, silence is golden. I think it's important, first of all, to ask questions, and get the other person talking, right? So that you can understand like where they're coming from. And also you can be thinking about, how do I make this situation feel like a win-win? How do I get through? Because negotiations can be dicey, right? And they can be a little uncomfortable. But if you are coming into an organization, you're negotiating with your boss, for example, your boss to be, or you're in the organization and you're negotiating with your boss to be, you above all want to preserve that relationship. So, I think sometimes when people think about negotiating, they think about like hard charging, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to say exactly what I want. But what you don't want to do is damage that relationship, because that is going to be a really important, if not the most important, relationship you have in the organization, and you don't want to damage that. And you can also ask for what you want. But before you would come in and ask for what you want, you might start with asking questions about, what are the goals for this year? What do you need from my team? What would success look like? How can we help you be more successful? And then you get some agreement on those things, and then you come for the ask, right? You deliver on those things, and then you come for the ask. So it's back to the deposits and withdrawals, because you made the deposits, right? And now you're coming for the withdrawal. And when you come for the withdrawal, I think you're still focused on, how can I be, clear and kind and firm in my ask, in a way that I can preserve this relationship. And so, first of all, you would come in and do a little bit of a warm up, where you're saying things like, I really love my job here. I am so excited about the work that we've been doing. I'm thrilled to be a member of this team. I want to talk about my role and where I'm going, and how I can progress in my role, both from a promotion perspective, but also from a compensation perspective. And just start that, and then be silent. And then be silent. Let the boss start to say what she's thinking, so that you can sort of get her, where she is with it, how things are going. And there might even be times you get into that conversation, you realize, this is probably not the best day to have this conversation. Like maybe something just happened. And because you're asking questions, you find out, let's revisit. I get, you got a lot on your plate. Let's revisit this. We'll circle back next month. Maybe we can go to lunch or something. So you have to be really sensitized and use your emotional intelligence in those moments to figure out, where are they, and how much do I push, versus how much do I sit back. And both pushing and sitting back are equally important in negotiating, because there are times when you just want to say, tell me more about that. Oh, can you elaborate on that? Or and that creates enough of an awkward silence or an invitation for the other person to talk. And then you get lots of data about where they are. And then you can use that to formulate your win-win and or overcome objections.
Interesting. So you gave us some really powerful phrases there. You actually gave us an example of how to ask specifically, do a little bit of a warm up. And then, I would like to talk about my compensation, and then so on and so forth. And then pause. And that silence is golden, you said. So I think that silence sometimes is really powerful because it gives the other person the room to then say what they're thinking. And to your point, this is where you start gathering some information. So I think that whole process, and again, you gave us some really good, powerful phrases there. So I'm going to go back and listen to those. And one of the things that I think I had mentioned to you that I wanted to do is put together a document of sorts with some of these powerful phrases, because this is where I think a lot of times we say, yes, negotiate, but we may not be, as leaders, we're not giving the proper language or the phrases. And sometimes you just need one little phrase to say, oh, I'd really like to talk about my compensation, or, let's talk about the goals of where the business is going, and set it up that way. So I think those are all great phrases. Now, obviously, it's going to depend on your position, right? So I know that you have been, again, in HR for a really long time. So tell me a little bit about how, I want to talk about your story now a little bit. You're obviously a coach, and you have been in the HR world for quite a long time. So how do you decide to go from being in HR to a high performance coach?
Well, that's a great question. What a lot of people don't know is that when you are in HR leadership roles, you are in effect an internal coach. And so you spend a lot of your time, especially as you move up to an executive level, you're spending a lot of time with other business leaders and helping them solve their business problems and being a sounding board. And in a lot of ways, and people don't talk about it much, but doing a lot of emotional labor with other leaders in the organization. And so I also, prior to going into HR and actually concurrent to being in HR, was a therapist. And so this feels very full circle in a lot of ways to do executive coaching or to work with executive teams. Because I've sat in the C-suite. I understand the incredible pressures that they're facing and the practicalities that they're facing. But I also am comfortable talking with them, going deep if I need to, and talking with them about where they are and how they're feeling about it, and how we can get them to the best place where they can be most effective at a personal and professional level.
Gosh, that makes so much sense, because you're right. When you're in HR, managers, I'm assuming, come to you with all their problems, with their direct reports, and then they're looking to you for advice. So you are coaching those folks. And I guess I personally didn't realize, because it's always HR, it's just HR.
Yeah, you get all sorts of things. You might get, because HR is where you come if you have a personal issue that's going to affect your work and you need advice on how to handle it, or if it's your team, or you're having a conflict with another leader and how do I resolve it? Like, there are a lot of things that people would come to HR for. And that was one of my more favorite things to do, is to coach leaders. And so when I had the opportunity to just do that, then I took it, because it's very rewarding to help leaders, as they're on their leadership journey, and we all are. We're all trying to improve all the time, and it's fun to be part of that process.
Now, you obviously had male and female leaders that you would coach. Can you pinpoint, and I know confidence is like a big thing of the difference between male behavior and female behavior, but did you have to coach female leaders to be a little bit tougher, have a little bit more confidence, more than you did male leaders?
Sometimes. I think, one of the things that you sometimes find, and I found this with candidates too, leader candidates that were coming into the organization, or internal folks who were applying for roles that would have been a promotion, that I would see that often women would want to have, every box checked on that job description before they would think that they were qualified, and maybe even more than that, before they would feel like they were qualified. And whereas men didn't feel that way. They would say, gosh, I've got 65-75% of it. I'm going to learn the rest on the job, and I'm ready to go. And so coaching them to be more confident in their own abilities, and also realizing that if you take a job where you already can check off 100% of it, you're going to be bored in 4 weeks. I mean, you're going to hate the job. So everyone is coming into a job and they're going to grow into it. Everybody, in some way, some form or fashion, you're going to be growing into the job. And so helping them see that that everyone is coming into a role, and everyone will inhabit it differently. And every person coming into that job has got, upsides and downsides. And so it's all a series of trade-offs. And so what are the things that you need to develop to be successful in this role, and what support do you need? But absolutely throw your hat in the ring for it. And if you don't get it, by the way, throwing your hat in the ring for it puts you on the radar. Mm-hmm. So as somebody who wants to continue to move up, and if you don't get it, ask for feedback, and be assertive about your own career, and don't just wait for someone to pluck you from, don't wait for someone to come pluck you from the ranks and move you up. I mean, you really have to set the stage yourself to do that.
I'm chuckling because when I was trying to get into management, I was already working towards becoming a high performance, individual, and I was already high performer. And I'm sitting at my desk, Patty, literally waiting for someone to come and tap me on my shoulder. I mean, physically, I can picture myself in my seat,
identify.
And it's like, and then when I finally said something, they're like, "Oh, really?" And I'm like, "Yes, oh, really? What do you mean?" And they were like, "Well, you never said anything." And I'm like, how did I wait so long? Which is
right.
Part of the reason why I'm doing this work today, Patty.
Yeah, it's so common though. It's so common. And I think it's a situation where someone might think, well, my work will speak for itself. Yes. And certainly you have to perform if you want to be promoted, usually. But that's only one piece. So they know that you can perform, but you may not have the visibility or exposure in the areas that you need. They may not know you have an interest. And so you have to take ownership of driving your own career.
Yeah, and I think that's what happened to me. It was the misconception of my work will speak for itself. They'll notice my hard work. Someone has to see what I'm doing. But the thing that I always emphasize is that your boss is busy doing their own job. And yes, they know that you're doing work, but it's not their job to highlight what you do. It's your job. Like you said, be the person that is responsible for you and for your career, because otherwise nobody's going to do it. Absolutely.
No one will do it.
Absolutely. Now, I know that you're writing a book on personalized leadership. Tell me a little bit about that project.
Yeah, exciting. It's my first book, and I've written a few articles about it, but it's really, thinking about where we are now. And so much has changed about in the employee-employer contract. It's certainly the craziest talent market I've ever seen in my career. But even beyond, because that will settle down, the pendulum always swings. But what I think won't change is that people have spoken. They want flexible options, yeah. And they're digging in their heels about coming back to the office, and they really want to have a more fulsome life. And so if hybrid and remote work help them do that, then they're willing to leave a job to find one that that will allow them to do that and to have more boundaries in their lives, whatever that means to them, because everybody has their own set of boundaries and their way of working. And I think what people want is autonomy, the autonomy to choose that and still meet the business needs, right? There has to that has to be the symbiotic relationship. And so as leaders think about that, everybody's needs are different. So, you know, and I'm guilty of this back in my HR days. You know, we make policy, for example, and a lot of the policy, we would try to figure out like, what's the worst case scenario that could happen in this policy? And then let's put all the belts and suspenders into that policy so that we can avoid the worst case scenario. But at times what you did was for the folks who were actually showing up and doing their jobs, which are most people, and who want to do a good job and want to be productive and want to be successful, then you were creating limits and constraints for them in order to manage risk. And so this idea that there's sort of a peanut butter spread of leadership doesn't make sense. So, you know, one of the popular questions, I think people still use it, but I used to get when I was interviewing is, what's your leadership style? And I think the answer to that should be, it depends, because it's not about me. This is not, you know, a cult of personality. It's about the people on my team that I'm serving. And if I'm truly supporting them in their success, then I'm like the wolf pack and leading from the back. And making sure everybody's getting what they need. And every single person has different needs, different social, different emotional, different financial, different family lives, different seasons of life. And so the idea that you have to make sort of a blanket, you know, policy or process for where and how you work doesn't actually make a lot of sense when you think about it, because people have really different needs. So the question becomes, how can you customize an experience that enables each individual's success while also still being equitable? And so that's what the book tackles, because I think that's what we're moving into. I think that I'm a Gen Xer, but the millennials and Gen Xers are sort of we're in between. Like, we kind of like what we're seeing with the millennials and the Gen Zs, but we also grew up, you know, paying our dues and working hard. And so the millennials and the Gen Zs, though, have very different perspectives about it. And so as you think about how much of the workforce they're going to make up pretty soon, we have to start adjusting and giving leaders tools to do that.
Wow, I think that's brilliant, because you're absolutely right. You can't just be like, oh, I'm an open door policy, you know, leader or whatever. You do have to customize how you're leading according to your team. And I think that's fantastic that you very eloquently put that, because it can't just be one mold for everybody. And so interesting, because I heard a CEO of a company today say that, in his opinion, people are much more productive when they're in the office. And I was like, where is the proof in that? I'm like, seriously, you're going to say that in this day and age? Because how people have not missed a beat when we went from, you know, the pandemic, COVID and all that stuff. And most companies already had some kind of hybrid work. And so people just worked and just kind of transitioned, and it was almost seamlessly in most cases. So for you to say that, oh, I think people work better when they're in the office, well, but you didn't have to do the hour commute or hour and a half commute one, you know, each way, and then have to get your kids up from, you know, their warm beds and in the winter and out the door and all this stuff. And it's like, there's a lot to consider. Like you were saying, there's a whole person behind the work. So you can't just say blanket same as, like, in my opinion, you know, we're much more productive when we're in the office. Well, where's the proof in that?
Right. And who does that work for? And who does that apply to? And I think the organizations that are mandating return to office are struggling, and they're backtracking
Yes.
because they're losing talent. But I think the ones that are attending to people's needs are the ones, and that means everything from the flexibility, but also what's the work they want to do? What's the intersection of their strengths and interest, and how can I get you as much of that as possible? And conversely, what depletes you, and how do we, does someone else on the team love that? Let's have them do it. And really thinking about personalizing jobs and job descriptions, because people are very energized, and of course, when they're energized, they perform better. When they're doing stuff that they feel good about, they enjoy, and they feel confident about.
Yes, I've heard that when someone has those characteristics in the job that they're doing, their productivity goes up from like 12 to 14%. So it's pretty huge. Now, you were also talking about the, like, who does that serve? Obviously, there's so many different life situations, and it can't just serve you as the employee. It has to serve your family. And I think a lot of employers now are trying to take the whole person into consideration. And I think that's probably the best way to go nowadays, because, to your point, people that are digging, or I should say companies that are digging their heels and saying, you need to be in the office, are losing those people, because I'm sorry, but I don't want to spend 6 hours in the car or, 10 hours in the car when I don't absolutely have to. Now, when is your book coming out?
Probably 2024. It's a long process.
Okay.
And it's a tough process. I quote Gloria Steinem, who says she wrote a lot, right? But she said, I don't like writing, I like having written. And that's how I feel too.
That's awesome. Now, are you using some of the coaching techniques that you're using today, and are those going to be in the book?
Absolutely. And really, some of these things came out of the coaching and the work with executives, because you start to see them trying to figure out what's happening with talent. How do we address this? What do we do? Because there were a lot of big questions, and you're right, it was a lot of change at once. And so I think organizations are still catching up and trying to catch their breath and figure out, okay, now what's going to work? And so so many of those conversations, and it sort of led to, well, how could we rethink this? How could we do this differently?
Yes. And it's also interesting because now, I mean, I've done a lot of volunteer coaching as well, but I find that with my clients, the things that they appreciate the most is not necessarily the lessons, but the encouragement and you can do this. And I had a conversation with someone where their boss was not being very nice to them. And I said, you don't have to take that, and not like walk out of the, like quit or anything like that, but you can respectfully say, you know what? I don't talk to you that way. Please don't talk to me that way. I expect you to talk to me with respect. So you can totally say something like that and be well within your right to demand respect from your manager. The manager can coach you or tell you what you're doing right or wrong or whatever in a respectful way, regardless of what's happening, with you and in your job. So, well, I'm very much looking forward to this book, because I love the way that you pose the customized leadership. So that's going to be fantastic. Now, I do want to ask you a couple more things. So do you have, and you already gave us some powerful phrases, but do you have any, like, a go-to powerful phrase that is something that you recommend either your clients or that you used often in your negotiating while you were in HR or now with your clients?
Yeah, I think using, and I don't know if they're phrases as much as certain words.
Okay.
Like, partner. I want to partner with you. And one of the things that I'm very careful about in negotiations, I didn't mention this earlier, but I should now, is where you sit and how you sort of think about the problem that you're trying to solve and become a partner with the other person. So if you go into a room, try not to sit directly opposite. Try to sit on the side, because then it's easier for you to even with your hand sort of gesture into the middle of the table and say, like, this is the issue that I want to solve with you. How can we do that together? How can we partner to get to the best answer? What does success look like to you? How would you define success? And really making them partner with you to solve the problem. And the problem could be, I don't make enough money. The problem could be, I think I need to be promoted. But also to pull in the things that they're thinking about and the problems they're trying to solve and applying those, where they make sense as solutions to that problem so that you can get to, the best possible outcome. So I love the word partner.
Got it. And I think all those phrases are great. Now, what would you suggest to somebody if they do all those things and they're not successful? Whether they're, the manager is saying, sorry, we're off cycle, for the promotion or the salary increase. What would your response be in that situation?
Well, first of all, I would say you might expect that you're not going to be successful the first time. But it goes back to planting the seeds, right? So if you're just sort of bursting in through the saloon doors and declaring that you'd like to negotiate for a raise, and it's the first they've heard about it, you can't expect that they're going to have an answer for you then in that moment. And it's probably not going, if you get an answer, it won't be a great answer. And so really thinking about a longer cycle of, this is a process and not an event. So think about negotiation as, first, I get agreement that my boss likes my performance. First, we get agreement that she thinks I'm being very successful and I'm helping her achieve her goals. Okay, so I'm working on that. And so once we have agreement on that, and then I'm able to share, maybe I share salary information that I've done some salary research and this is what I found. Then you've already at least gotten agreement on the fact that you deserve it. Okay. Then you just have to get agreement on how much and when. And so, it might be actually true that it's off cycle and there isn't anything that you can do about it right then. So then your answer there could be, okay, I get that. Could we talk about this, at the end of Q1 and just revisit it and get the agreement that you're going to resurface that conversation, because it's not usually a one and done at all. It's usually, in almost any negotiation, it is, an evolution, not a revolution, for sure.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And by the way, I kind of wanted to go back to your comment that I'm also a Gen Xer. I'm also part of the, put in your hours, pay your dues, and do not talk salary. And I'm sure you've heard this, but Gen Z folks, like 42% of Gen Zs are now talking salary openly, and it's perfectly fine. And I'm sure you've also heard this. There's a lot of 17 states now with the pay transparency laws, New York being the most recent one. And so I think that's going to help close the pay gap. And I hope that all states, go with this pay transparency law. Some of those states, though, they won't post the range, but they have to provide it if you ask for it. So at least we're trending in the right direction, right?
Yes. Yes. And that, whenever, especially in those situations where someone is negotiating for a new job, even if it's legal in the state for the recruiter to ask, what are you currently making? What's your current compensation package? It's perfectly appropriate to come back with, here's what I'm looking for.
Oh.
And then talking through that package. You don't have to give them that information at all. But you can say, here are my expectations. And you can talk to them about what aspects of especially as you go up the ladder, compensation packages have many components. And so you could talk to them about, these are my top 3. These are the things that matter to me the most. And this is where I'd like to get to. And then again, I'm really excited about this opportunity. And when they come back with maybe a disappointing number, that's your next stage in the negotiation. You don't start negotiating till you get an answer you don't like, right? So then you say, that's a great starting point. Thanks so much for that. And let me just talk through what's really important to me and what I would feel comfortable with.
That's awesome. I think the last 3 or 4 minutes is the best part of the conversation that we've had, because you've definitely given people the formula to not have to say something that you don't want to say. Now, I have also, along the same lines, sometimes, especially recruiters really want to do this. They want to pigeonhole you into, you have to give me a number of what you're looking for. And I like the way you said, well, this is what I'm looking for. So if a recruiter is pressing you to give them a number, what would your response be?
Yeah, if they're really pressing, and I believe in having a compensation conversation earlier on, because I certainly have been burned in conversations where you think you're on the same page and you find out you're worlds apart, and it isn't feasible, right, to bring that person in. So I believe in having that conversation within the first or second conversation.
Oh, okay.
And because then if you're on the same page. The only time that doesn't work is if the job is sort of in formation, it's not clear what all of the accountabilities are. You might have to investigate a bit more, and maybe you're going to an early stage company or something and it's not defined. That's where you need more information. But you should be having that conversation up front so that you don't waste anyone's time.
Got it.
And you can talk about, here's where I'd like. Again, if you're at a higher level in the organization, here's where I would like to end up from a package perspective. And you can give them a number, but then how you negotiate the components, you can sort of look at, okay, if I give a little bit on salary, then I can get more equity, or whatever those that, or maybe because everyone's different, right? Somebody might want, cash on the barrel, as my grandma would say, or others might say, what, I'm okay taking a little bit of a haircut or not as much salary right now because I really believe in this company and I want the equity. Got it. So I think it's very appropriate to give people a number that is researched. I mean, definitely do your homework, because if you come in with something really outsized, then that's not going to work. And if they're not giving up, their number, then you can articulate your number and say, this is what I'm looking to get to.
Awesome. Wow. That was fantastic the last few minutes. So thank you so much. Well, Patty, this has been, I think, a really powerful and really concrete conversation because of all the phrases that you gave us and the idea. So thank you very much for that. Now, would you be able to provide the listeners with 2 tips that you would want to leave them with as far as how to negotiate in their careers?
Yeah, I think one I haven't spoken about yet, so it might be helpful, is be very self-aware of your emotional and mental state when you go into a high stakes conversation. No matter what that conversation is, whether it's negotiating a salary, whether it's you're giving somebody some really tough feedback, whatever that is, you need to make sure that you're in the right space to do that. And because if you are, let's say you're going in to talk about your salary with your boss and you're feeling particularly resentful because maybe you had a lot of work piled on you that week and you're feeling, kind of put upon, a little bit of a martyr. You're resentful, you're angry, you're tired. That's not a great time to have the conversation, because you want the conversation to have a positive tone.
Mhm.
Even if there's a bit of a tug and you are having a bit of conflict and you're introducing a little bit of tension, you still want it to have a positive tone. And if you are walking in already in a state that is not going to serve you, do not do it. Wait till you're in the right space to do that, to have that conversation. And I would say that for anyone. And I usually say, don't have them at the end of the day.
Right.
Because people are tired.
Yes.
And they're sort of
Agreed.
out of bandwidth.
Okay, so that's your first one. Did you have a second one?
Yeah, I think I would just go back to really building those relationships with people and taking the time to do that, because and I really get that it's a time suck, but it is so effective when you come knocking for what you want that you have already given at the office, so that they know that they're in a position to want to help you as well.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh, Patty, again, well, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. Again, I think this is a great conversation that people can actually use. And I'm going to put all those like key phrases together. And I'm like really excited about that. I want to leave you with do you have any final words for our listeners when it comes to negotiating in their corporate jobs?
I would just say you're more prepared than you think you are.
Oh.
And even if you do it awkwardly, you'll get better at it, but still do it. So like if it scares you, it probably means you should do it. So just do it, because even if you're not successful the first time, you'll learn something every single time and be able to build on that and get better with experience, and take that as you progress in your career. Just in the words of Nike, just do it.
Just do it. I love it. All right, Patty. Well, thank you so much for your time again. This was a wonderful conversation.
Rosie, so fun. Thank you for having me.
My conversation with Patty Carl was absolutely fabulous. She gave us some tremendous golden nuggets of information. I think the biggest piece of knowledge for me is seeding your initiatives, making sure that you take the time to have several meetings before you actually do the request. So you shouldn't go into your manager's office and say, hey, I want to raise. You're going to have 2 or 3 meetings before then, just acknowledging that they acknowledge that your performance is doing well and where your career is going, and then maybe think about how you're going to position the compensation conversation, but it should be several conversations before you actually get there. So one other thing that Patty said is you really need to position the conversation properly. So she says you can say something like, hey, I really love my job here. I'm so excited about the work that we're doing. I want to talk to you about my role, where I'm going, and not only from a promotion perspective, but also from a compensation perspective. And then be silent. And that really is key, because you will learn what your boss is thinking. So silence is golden. And she gave us a ton of really good, powerful phrases. The word partner, for example, she says, when you're working with someone, maybe on a project, she says you want to pull in those things that they're thinking about and try to solve the problem together. So it's not you against them, it's you and the individual against the problem. So you're going to go in there and say, hey, let's figure out how we can partner together to solve this problem. So I think it's really important. That word partner is really key. And another thing, another phrase that she provided us is, how do you define success? I think that's also really important, because if the other person thinks of success differently than you do, then there's going to be a disconnect. So the information that Patty provided us with was, again, just pure gold. So I want to leave you with a couple of tips that Patty provided us. She said, tip number 1, she says, be self-aware of your emotional and mental state when you're going into a high-stakes conversation. So it doesn't matter if you're negotiating a salary or giving somebody some feedback. Whatever it is, you have to make sure that you are in the right state of mind. So if you realize that you're either upset or angry, that's probably not the best time to have any kind of difficult conversation. So wait until you're in a better state. And then tip number 2, she says, build relationships with people and make sure that you take the time to develop those relationships. And we also talked about deposits and withdrawals with relationships. So the more you are able to build that relationship, then when you need something, you can easily go and ask for something from that particular individual. As always, all of Patty's contact information is going to be on the episode website. So go there for her contact information. And with that, remember to be brave, be bold, and take action.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Let these stories of self-encouragement and professional development serve as a guide in navigating through corporate America in the most practical and fulfilling way possible. Do not forget to subscribe to the show at nowomanleftbehind.com for more content like this. Leave a rating and share it with your friends, because we want to make sure that no woman is left behind. Until I see you next time, remember to be brave, be bold, and take action.